And here now is Gordon Chang, Forbes columnist and author of Nuclear Showdown. North Korea takes on the world. First of all, extraordinary reporting from our own guy. It's a little self-serving to mention, but Greg Palkot is in North Korea as all this is about to happen. That's amazing. And we have, over the weekend, our own vice president is going to be arriving in Seoul. And for those who've forgotten, Seoul is basically right across the border from the north.
It's 30 miles from the demilitarized zone, which separates the two Koreas.
What do you think about sending our vice president to the heart of what could be an active war zone?
A little bit dangerous. I guess there's a sense that there won't be a war at this moment, and that's probably right.
Do you think there will or will not be a nuclear explosion this weekend by the North Koreans?
My sense is that there won't. You know, if you had asked me before Thursday, I would have said...
You're disagreeing with what we heard from Lieutenant General McInerney.
Yeah, I mean, of course, no one knows, but, you know, if you'd asked me before Thursday, I would say definitely. But Thursday night, when President Trump announced the missile strikes on Syria with Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, next to him, I think what he did was he unnerved Beijing. And I don't think the Chinese now, I think the Chinese now don't really know what Trump can do. And
so the Chinese now are genuinely leaning on the Koreans. We have, by the way, a statement from the North Koreans about the Chinese. It's kind of an obscure reference to them, but it says, currently with the cooperation of somebody, in quote marks, the U.S. is planning to collapse our system, the action that is such a naive and foolish delusion. Now, clearly somebody is referring to the Chinese, so the North Koreans are upset at the Chinese right now.
Well, they are, and they have a good reason to be. Global Times, which is controlled by People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China, Global Times ran a commentary about how if the North Koreans tested a nuke, that China might actually strike North Korean facilities from the air. Now, Global Times is not official, but they wouldn't have run something like that if the Beijing leadership didn't want them to. And we had Air China, which is the flag carrier, just a few hours ago, announced it was suspending flights to and from Pyongyang.
And let's not forget, the Chinese returned an entire fleet of cargo ships that had North Korean coal on them. And that is extraordinary, because that's really their only means of getting income, right?
Well, the North Koreans, about 90% of their external trade is with China. China supplies about 100% of its crude oil and exactly 100% of its aviation fuel. So the Chinese have a lot of influence over what goes on.
So their fuel would dry up, their nuclear hardware would dry up. All of those things that cause them to be a threat to us and the world would not exist if it weren't for China.
Yeah, I believe so. And essentially what happens is China probably couldn't convince Kim Jong-un to give up his weapons program, but China could very well convince the 300 or so people that constitute the North Korean regime to desert Kim Jong-un, because they really are there on a transactional basis in many cases.
Are you talking to all those generals that we see surrounding Kim and all those times?
In Greg Palkot's report, it's the generals and the admirals and the senior officials, all of these.
So they're not willing to commit suicide by standing by this crazy madman, Kim.
Yeah, and so China has the ability to pull them away. And so I think that Beijing in the last few days has tried to rein in Kim Jong-un. We will see. And by the way, David, if North Korea does in fact go in forward with a detonation or with a missile launch or something else provocative, it will mean that Beijing has lost control of Pyongyang.
Well, they don't want that to happen, do they? I mean, wouldn't that then put them directly on our side against the North Koreans, and that would completely lead to their collapse?
I think so. You know, essentially 6 months, 8 months down the road, the North Koreans would not be able to sustain their economy. Now, in the past, China has shown great displays of cooperation with the United States and the international community. And then when we became distracted on something else, Beijing went back to its default position, which was supporting the North Korean regime. The question is whether President Trump can maintain pressure on China to not change this initial phase of cooperation.
Well, this is all happening extremely fast, because according to you, it started with that Thursday night dinner that the president of China had on the very night that the Syrian attack took place.
And it continued through yesterday with the dropping of the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan. Remember,
so all this is bringing the foreign, I don't mean to simplify things, but all of our foreign policy now is working towards the same goal, a strong United States that gets what it needs to get done.
Yes, and clearly, you know, the North Koreans took that message from yesterday, because we went after underground tunnels and networks. North Korea has put more of its government facilities and its military operations underground, more than any other country. Kim Jong-un must have known what was happening.
And as we just heard from General McInerney, we now have a bomb even more powerful than the one we saw in Afghanistan, which has the possibility of penetrating those tunnels. So there's nothing off limits if we decide it needs to be done. Gordon Chang, fascinating discussion. Appreciate it. Thanks you very much.